is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 123 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I am joined by Paddy Finn, and we are going to be talking all about Kickstarter. Kickstarter for indie authors, how to use it, how to run one, the types of goals you should do, and all of that good stuff. But first, to last week's question, which was, how are you advocating for your creative self? And I'm sad to say, no one commented on that question, which I don't know whether that means no one is advocating for their creative selves, but I hope that's not what it means. Yes, I knew asking that question, it was a hard one, so I wasn't expecting loads of responses, but guys, please be advocating for yourselves, in particular your creative selves. All right, so this week's question is a little easier. Have you ever run or backed a Kickstarter? If so, what was it about? Tell me, let me know in the comments. Book recommendation of the week this week is Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. Now, I was recommended this one by a mutual lover of gay and lesbian and sapphic fiction. So yes, thank you very much for that recommendation, Samira. And now I am recommending it to all of you lovely listeners. So Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. This book was so funny. It's fake dating. It's about a kind of washed up rock star's kid who is constantly in sort of low grade newspapers and the tabloids and stuff, and a lawyer, vegetarian lawyer, and they end up fake dating for various reasons. And of course, I'm sure you all know what happens in a fake dating. But the reason I loved it is because I loved the characterization, I loved the romance. I was just swooning over the romance, and it was so funny, and I also loved the voice, so I would highly recommend that you read that book. Okay, personal update. Wow, it feels like we're like rushing through the intro this week, but anyway, personal update. Wow. It has been a fucking week, let me tell you. So Friday morning, Atlas, the last episode that I recorded a week ago. So Friday last week, which was, I don't know, like the 21st, something like that. And Atlas tested positive that morning. Not fun. He has been off school all week. We have managed to do some homeschooling, and there's been some tech time as well, so I can get some semblance of work done. And then on Sunday, I was holding my son and I slipped, and I essentially did a partial dislocation of my kneecap, and as I swung back round, I snapped my leg back in, so the kneecap went straight back in, but obviously it left, thankfully it didn't stay dislocated for long, so I didn't do a huge amount of damage, but I have still got residual ligament damage. My MCL ligament's damaged, and yeah, I've been on crutches for part of this week, which has not been great. I'm sort of finding that I can now hobble around the house without the crutches, but I can't, like, any length of time is tricky. And Atlas lost the remote yesterday, and I was sort of getting up and down, trying to look for it, and that just really buggered my knee. The up and down is not great. So yeah, I think despite my disillusions that I was going to be healed in a week, yeah, really not. So I'm just hoping that I can go back to Taekwondo before too long. Thankfully, my next door neighbour is a sports therapist, so I'm going to throw money at him and demand that he fix me, and fingers crossed I'll be back to normal. I also found this week really tricky mentally. I have been trapped in my house since Sunday, and I don't cope very well with that, and I have also found it really difficult because I am not going to hit my original deadline of finishing Tray and getting it off to the editor by the end of this month. With Atlas off, I have not got an awful lot done this week, and that just threw like my achiever mentality out the window. I don't cope very well if I don't get to work. And it's because work is the thing that I love, and I love building my business and growing my business, and it brings me joy. And if I don't get to do that, I get like very, very down very quickly. So, especially if that means missing a target. So I was in such a festering hole of a place that I decided to book coaching, and oh my goodness, like the strengths coaches are amazing and really pulled my mindset back out. And I've now set some really big goals, and things are like moving and changing in the background. I have made some decisions. I've outsourced a bit more. And I think my life might look very different by the end of this year than it does right now. But yeah, that is probably as much as I can say right now, which I know this is such a dick move, but like I just had to, I think one of the things that was putting me down was I hadn't made a decision on something, and I was suffering from decision fatigue basically, because instead of just making the decision, I was going round and round in a circle. And the other thing about me is that like my learner and my input and just like my general geeky schoolgirlness loves to take in information, and so I will always do the webinars, and I will read the non-fiction books, and I will do all of that, and I will listen to opinions and what other people are doing. But then I struggle because sometimes I take those things to heart a bit too much. And essentially one of my strengths is called self-assurance, and self-assurance combined with strategic, I really just have to make those decisions by myself. Like I have to be driven from like internal. And so I was paying a bit too much attention to the outside world, I think, and I'd forgotten and felt a bit lost about who I was, what I was doing, like my reasons why I was doing these things. So yeah, it has been a really tough mental week, I think, but I'm in a much better place today and very excited for like working on this particular goal. So yes, things are looking up, and I've now set a new deadline for, and I'm not going to tell you what, so you'll just have to wait and see, but I'm hoping I can get Trey done and finished very, very soon. And then I will be shifting into a whole new kind of mindset and arena, and yes, I will be, things will be different, like so I'm very, very excited. I will update you more on that when I know more. Okay, so the rebel of the week this week is Rick Waugh. I hope that's how you say your surname. So Rick says, Rick actually had some very lovely things to say about the podcast. So thank you very much for those lovely words. I appreciate it. So Rick says, I have always been a creative person. I started out with drawing as a kid, but moved into music as I went to high school in the early 70s when everyone tried guitar. I kept going, eventually taking up playing bass, joining the local band culture and getting into a couple of bands where for a little while I tried to make a living. I also started writing fantasy as a teenager and wrote half a dozen books between then and my late 20s. I wanted to be a rock star, but realised what a rough ride it would be to pursue that dream, and lacked both the confidence in my abilities and the mental toughness to survive the chaos of the music biz. I was offered a job at the telephone company and took it, with its steady wage and a pension. I kept writing in the mornings and finally around book 6 snagged a great agent who shopped my manuscript around the big publishers in New York. It didn't sell. Truth to tell, it wasn't a very good book, but I was pretty much crushed, so I quit writing, plonked away at my day job for 40 years doing the right things, the expected things, and met my wife and had 3 wonderful children, so it's not all bad. I did keep playing music for myself to keep the creativity alive. I retired at 60 with no intention of doing much beyond playing some music by myself still, and slowly falling to pieces, as all good retirees do. But then I found a jam session to join. Suddenly, I was out playing songs with others and singing. Then I had another thought. I wanted to write again. So I educated myself on what was going on in the industry and started to bang out a story, one I'd had ideas for in my 20s, an epic fantasy about a minstrel whose music creates magic. Realising a single book wouldn't do much, it became a trilogy with prequels. I found a great local critique group to workshop it all. I published it over the last few months, and with book 3 and a prequel that the minstrel plays in the book just for fun, but also stuck them up on YouTube. Oh, sorry. I also wrote and recorded I don't know what happened here. I completely missed the lines. I published it over the last few months, with book 3 and a prequel going live in January 2022. I'm working on the final book, another prequel, to be released in April. I also wrote and recorded all of the music that the minstrel plays in the book, just for fun, and also stuck those up on YouTube and SoundCloud in case my readers want to hear them. I am sure they will. So there it is. I stepped off the bus at age 60 and stepped into my dream life. I haven't sold a lot of books yet, but I'm still working on the marketing pieces. I'm thinking about my next series, doing research so it will be more on point genre-wise. Nobody is ever too old to pick it up, and I can tell you it makes the retired life a lot more satisfying. This, and you are never too old to rebel either. I just love that you have finally gone back and picked up the proverbial pen, and you are doing the thing that has been always in your heart. So yes, I absolutely love that rebellion. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story. It can be any kind of rebellion, big, small, or something in between. You can email your story, your rebel story, to Becca over on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, no new patrons this week, but a gigantic thank you to all of my existing patrons. If you would like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus content from as little as $2 a month, you can by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. And at the Rebel Readers level, we are doing a film night because the book that we have chosen this month, The Hating Game, is also a movie. So we are all going to watch the movie together on a group Zoom, which I think is going to be super fun. So yes, if you would like to come and join us to do that, then you are welcome to. Okay, this episode is sponsored by ProWritingAid. I'm going to play a word from one of my amazing patrons, Lynn Reed Aubrey, who uses ProWritingAid. So let's have a listen to why Lynn loves ProWritingAid.
Hello, my name is Lynn, and I'm an author writing in science fiction fantasy. And I use ProWritingAid a lot. I highly recommend it. It is an amazing program, and you can use it at any point while you're creating something. I usually use Scrivener or Word or a handy napkin to write my ideas down. And then once I get it down on the page, I start editing, and I use ProWritingAid to help pull out those weird grammar things, like I ended a sentence with a preposition, or what words I'm overusing too much. I really have an issue with the word that. I use that all the time. And I also misspell the word the. I'll have to look into that. See, right there. ProWritingAid can help you with that. So I highly recommend it. There are so many different tweaks, tools inside of ProWritingAid that you can use to help your writing, to polish your writing before you send it to an editor. However you use it, just use it. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I am joined by Paddy Finn. Paddy is a full-time content creator and runs Starcane Press and Penny Dragon Games. He's a science fiction and fantasy author and TTRPG game designer. He's been focused on Kickstarter recently and sees a lot of untapped potential in the platform for indie authors and other creators. Hello and welcome.
Wow, thanks very much for the nice intro.
You're most welcome. So I know what RPG stands for. Well, I actually possibly don't know what the actual letters are, but I know what RPG is. What is TT?
Tabletop.
Okay. Tabletop RPG games. What is RPG? It's not, what is...
It's like a role-playing game. So can think of it as like a choose-your-own-adventure novel where you collectively tell a story together around a table, essentially.
Yeah. Dungeons and Dragons style.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, lovely. My wife is now cleaning her car outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but I might mute myself whilst you talk.
Actually can't.
Oh, you can't? Oh, okay. Well, that's pretty good. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me. Before we dive into Kickstarter, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about you and your journey and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I'll give you guys the short story instead of the long one, but I started out in 2016 publishing my own novels. I started with science fiction. So I started out in the indie author space, if you want to call it that, and eventually worked my way up to becoming a full-time indie author. And I left my very lucrative full-time career, IT career, in 2018, November. So that was scary. And I guess fast forward a few years, I saw a few opportunities sort of related to, but sort of also on the fringes or outside of the indie author space, kind of like related industries, where, I kind of looked at the industry, the indie author industry, and where it had gone, and saw that there were these other industries that were perhaps less developed and where the indie author industry was several years ago. So there was still a lot of opportunity for growth and opportunity for, to capitalize on that growth from a business perspective. So I kind of tapped into that last year. So I'm sort of straddling this line between indie author and game development. So like, writing novels and then creating tabletop RPGs for Dungeons and Dragons and other games like that. And the RPG thing, the Kickstarter Dungeons and Dragons thing, got a lot of attention in 2021. So we're going to be swinging back a little more in the coming year to sort of like try and split it 50-50 between novels and Dungeons and Dragons.
I was going to ask, because obviously I know I've been following from afar on Facebook, but I wasn't sure if you were still novel writing, because it seems like Kickstarter's a full-time job. Like, oh my goodness, there's so much work involved.
Yeah, the first, we'll get into it later, I suppose, but yeah.
Okay, and so I guess kind of speaking about Kickstarter being a full-time job, I don't know a huge amount about Kickstarter. I know the concept that somebody has a product or a thing and you sort of get funding in advance for it. But for those who maybe haven't heard about Kickstarter or only have a loose understanding like me, can you give us a bit more detail and tell everyone about the platform and like why you think indies ought to pay a bit more attention to it?
Yeah, so it is a lot of work. I will say that up front. However, I will also say that Kickstarter is an amazing platform, and I do think indies can make a lot more use out of it than I'm currently seeing. And I have seen more indies sort of start to work their way into Kickstarter and sort of dip their toes in and test it out and, see what this thing is. And that's really nice to see. And I foresee that happening a lot more in the future, which is great. But what is Kickstarter? I guess the basic way to put it is it's a crowdfunding platform. And what that means is you pretty much put an idea out into the void or out onto the platform. And if the crowd or the audience there likes that idea, well, then they're going to help you fund that idea. So for example, you could do that with a novel. I have this idea for an awesome series. I'm going to put it on the platform and see what kind of traction that gains. If it funds to, my goal, then I will be able to, that'll help me buy the cover, the editing, maybe even an audiobook or produce other IP related to that. To that series. So there's a lot of potential to help you get started as an author, but it is a lot of hard work in terms of you do need to bring a certain amount of your own traffic, and I know we'll probably touch on marketing and stuff like that later on, but it's a great community. People think of it as just like this weird platform, but it's actually a community, and when you become part of that community can respond really well to your ideas, and new things can happen.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a community. So that's news to me, because I suppose I saw it a bit more like a fundraising version of Patreon, where you need to bring your community. And I know you've mentioned that you do need to bring it, but the fact that there is a community there, that is not something that I realized. So I suppose my next question is, can anyone no, not can anyone, can you run everyone through a basic Kickstarter? Like, where do you begin? What do you need in place for it to run? And then, as you run it and fund it, how do you see it through to completion?
Yeah, that's a great point. So just a very brief rundown, and it's actually good to have something like this, because I remember when I started out with my first Kickstarter in February 2021, I didn't want to hit any buttons because I was afraid, what's going to happen next, and no one's there to tell you what happens next. So I had a kind friend who came along, and he did some consultation with me. I was very lucky to become friends with this guy. He had done several Kickstarters in the past, and he was able to sort of like hold my hand and give me a little bit of confidence and go, it's going to be okay, Paddy. This is what happens when you hit this submit for review button. It's not the end of the world. So what you would do is you normally have an idea, obviously, and that's going to be an idea that will resonate with an audience. So it could be you have, a newsletter with a bunch of readers who enjoy your books, and you're going to start a new series. And we'll just use a book series as an example, I suppose. So what you will then do is you will go to Kickstarter. If you haven't created an account already, you can do that. And then you create a new project. And it's actually very, very straightforward. I think people have this misconception that this stage is a lot of work and there's a lot involved and it's scary and we don't know what it is, but it's actually so straightforward. It's all the bits later on down the line after the project is funded is where the work comes in, right? And some of the marketing up front too. But essentially, you create your account, you have a page. The Kickstarter wants you to create a little story, maybe put in some graphics, tell people what you're going to create. You want to be clear in communicating what your idea or project or books are to your audience. You give them several tiers, so when someone comes in, they can back, to get just the ebook, whatever, a couple of dollars. But if they want the paperback, then it's going to be, let's say, $10. If they want the hardback, it's probably going to be $20-something. I'm just pulling numbers out of the ether here. It's whatever it is, but it's just to give you an idea that people can back at different tiers. And then when you're kind of ready, and you're happy with that page, you can hit the submit for review button, and that'll go through an automated review process. And if that finds any problems, it'll throw it off to a person. But eventually they'll come back to you within a few days normally and say, yay, here is your project. We're happy with it. Now, at that point, you haven't launched it, so don't worry. You don't. That was the bit where I was kind of really freaking out about. It was like, have I hit this button? Does it launch? And I'm not ready. And it doesn't. So you end up getting an option to have a pre-launch page. And the pre-launch page is just some people can go and follow your project before you've launched it, which is a really important tool that we might speak about a little bit more later if we talk about marketing. And once you're ready, then after you've got enough followers on the page or built up some momentum in terms of marketing and everything's all tickety-boo, you can hit launch and your Kickstarter launches into the world, and people can go and see it and see all the information on the nice page you design and pledge and back your wonderful project, and hopefully it funds and hits your goal, and and you get to create your awesome idea.
And with the pledges and the funding, is there a set amount of time? Do you get to choose the amount of time? How does that work?
Yeah, the Kickstarter community are very forgiving in terms of time and production schedules and things like that. So they don't expect you to, put up a project to say you're going to write a novel and then you have that novel ready in a week or in a month. They're happy to wait a year or even several years, as long as you're upfront and clear about, you can't tell them it's going to take 6 months and then, a year later you still haven't delivered. But if you know it's going to take a year, you tell them a year, then they're happy to wait.
Okay, so you don't have to have things funded in a certain amount of time.
Well, so when you launch a Kickstarter, you can choose how long you want the campaign to run. So normally it's like 30 days, right? That's the usual limit. So you have 30 days to hit a certain amount of, let's say you wanted $10,000 before you start writing this series. And normally you want to try and hit that fairly early on in the campaign. But that kind of comes into like launch strategies and things like that. But you have 30 days essentially to hit your goal, your target of $10,000, let's say. And once you hit that, you then have it depends on what you set on the tiers. If you had like a paperback and you say it's going to take 18 months to create that paperback, then people are happy then to wait 18 months after the campaign is finished for that paperback.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. So there's a follow-up question from Matt, who says, is there a guide to Kickstarter campaigns to help beginners who've never done it before? Something like a Kickstarter for Dummies 101. Are there any resources that you know of? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. One book, I can only recommend one book because it's the only book I've read, and it is Kickstarter Launch Formula by Salvador Briggman, I think, or no, Briggman. Yeah, I'm really good at butchering people's names.
Tell me that one
Salvador.
again. No, that's all right.
It's by Salvador Briggman. And that's Kickstarter Launch Formula. I think there's also an audiobook on Amazon. So he's produced the book and the audiobook and a few other bits and pieces. And I think he has a blog which goes really in depth into a lot of Kickstarter as well. And his book was pretty good. And then there's also a Facebook group called Kickstarter Best Practices. I can recommend that. Those folks are really helpful. They are Kickstarter people. Some of the mods work at Kickstarter, and they're very happy to help anyone that is new. They've been very helpful and understanding with me, and the community in there is they just want to help people out, right? So they're great. I recommend them. And in terms of any other books, there are a few podcasts. Briggman does one, and he actually has a recommendation on his website with like 3 different, the 3 best podcasts he recommends. So you might want to check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'll see if I can dig out a couple of links to go with those comments as well. So thinking about Kickstarter and choosing your project, what are like the best projects? Are there some projects that work better than others? Is it better to do a game versus a book? Are there certain types of games that would work? Is it better to do a series or a standalone? Talk to me about the kinds of things that work well on Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's another great question. So it really depends on, it's kind of like on Amazon, certain categories or genres do better than others, right? Or, they're so different. The romance genre is vastly different to, military science fiction, for example. And you would approach creating those products different ways based on the differences in those audiences. So it is similar on Kickstarter. They have categories, would be their equivalent of genres, let's say. One category would be literature. So that's where you would place your product if it's going to be a book series. They also have board games and tabletop games, which is one that I've used. Other ones are like gadgets and physical products. So you could pretty much put anything up there. In terms of what's best, it really depends on what your audience wants. The best project is the best one for the people who want the project, right? So you kind of have to figure out, well, what do my people want? My readers, I've built up this following of readers and audience and community around my books. Will they appreciate a hardback cover? Okay, if like a limited edition foil and beautiful design and all those things, is that something they want? And if it's a yes, then put it on Kickstarter, launch it and see how it does. Maybe it's they want a new series, or they want to see this other character developed in their own sort of like side series, or I'm just trying to think of it in terms of books. But the literature category is, let's say, newer in terms of the community. It hasn't grown as big as others. However, there is a lot of potential, and some people have done quite well on it. So for example, like on the D&D stuff, it's very easy to launch Kickstarter and make 20,000+, right? And a lot of companies make over $1 million. There are multiple projects every year that make over $1 million.
Was Brandon Sanderson a Kickstarter, or was he something else?
No, he definitely was a Kickstarter, and I was going to use him as an example of someone who has done really well for himself. I think he did 2.5 million or thereabouts dollars.
I think it was more like 6.
Oh, was it 6? Okay,
yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah, it was ridiculous money.
Yeah, and that's in the literature category, which generally is not as well developed as the Dungeons and Dragons side. So that's a great sign that people are willing to, invest in Kickstarter in the literature market.
Yeah, I'm just double checking now to make sure that I didn't come up with a completely wrong. I'm sure I heard it was something ridiculous. Like, no, it was $6,788,517. Fuck me.
That's madness. But and the thing is,
imagine.
Yeah, imagine getting like there was a guy who runs another small publishing company similar to mine. He's been doing it a lot longer and has, a more dedicated and bigger following because of that. But he launched one back, it was 2-3 months ago, and it made just short of $1 million, And he's someone who, I mean, he has nowhere near the celebrity of Brandon Sanderson, for example. And you may have people looking at that going, oh yeah, of course it's Brandon Sanderson. Of course he's going to, make millions and millions on Kickstarter because he's got a huge following. But if you think of it in terms of percentages, like imagine you could tap into even 1% of that audience. That's still pretty significant in terms of, what you could do for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you come up with your goals and your tiers before you started your project?
Right. So I had no idea what I was doing when I started. I did not have a clue. I had the same question. It's like I've looked at Kickstarters and I see people doing tiers and stretch goals and stuff, but I don't know how to do those. So what I actually did the same thing I did with when I launched my indie novel career, indie publishing career, which was I started small. And this has become a big thing that I try to tell other people when they approach me and ask about Kickstarter. So when I started out in indie publishing, instead of writing a novel, I wrote a tiny itty bitty short story collection that was like, 20 pages long or something ridiculous. And that was just my way of dipping my toes in and figuring out, well, what does it feel like to upload something to Amazon? What does it feel like to sell your first whatever? What does it feel like to collect an email address in exchange for this tiny little document? And that was, a lot of learning happened with that tiny little document, even though it was small. And then I took those lessons and applied them to novels. So it's the same thing with Kickstarter. I kind of started out really small. We were going to start with a really big project that we wanted to, take north of $100,000. And we had it all sort of laid out and ready and planned. And then I kind of got cold feet and I was like, hold on a minute. I don't know if, I've not done this. So first I want to run a tiny little Kickstarter with zero expectations. If it makes, $1,000 or $2,000, I'll be really happy. If I lose money, I don't care because it's investing in my education. And it actually, I think it came out over $4,000. So it sort of broke even. It lost a little bit, I think, in the long run, but again, that was fine. But what that did was it allowed me to learn what it was to do a tier or to do a stretch goal. And, because I kept it really small, there wasn't this huge pressure if I got it wrong, right?
So what was the project?
The project was Mag of Holding Frozen Wastelands. I can probably grab it here, actually, if I don't knock everything down off the shelf. So I created this thing, which is a 100 and I don't know if you can see it, 100 and something page kind of like publication with loads of art and maps and writing and lore and like monsters and just the stuff Dungeons and Dragons people love,
Yeah. Excellent. And so what did you learn from that in terms of then making goals and tiers? How did you determine what kinds of things to put in each one?
Yeah, it kind of taught me where the tolerances were and things like that. So, and also what people want and what people are happy to pay for.
Yeah.
Because
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you're creating something awesome, people are happy to pay, whatever they want to pay for it. So, for example, this thing, it started out as a 12-page. I was like, let's make a 12-page book, and then it ended at like 100 and I don't know what exactly, but 115 pages, 116 pages or something. So it just kind of grew and grew and grew into this huge mammoth that it wasn't supposed to be. And that's why we ended up doing so many Kickstarters last year, because we wanted to keep making them because people asked for more. So what do we learn in terms of like money? It was like we charged way too much in the first one, or sorry, we charged way too little rather, way too little for what we were creating. But that taught us that lesson. And then we were able to go into the next one and go, okay, we need to charge more, for example.
So what are some of the things that you put in each tier? Like what did you,
Yeah, so one is like, digital only product.
Okay.
A PDF for Dungeons and Dragons. If you're doing a novel, it's going to be an ebook. And then another tier would be a physical copy plus the ebook. And then you could have like a collector's edition higher up. You charge a bit more for that. Then you could have, we have one where you can work with us and our artists to create a piece of art featuring the characters of your players that you play with at your table.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you could do something like that and, pay a little bit extra on this tier, and we will include a character in a novel based on, named after you, or, based on something you want to help us to create. And then we have other things like where it's, you can be an executive publisher and get a credit and additional copies, and just trying to think of what do people value and what would they want.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Have you made any mistakes? Or if you haven't and you were lucky not to make any mistakes, have you seen any sort of friends, colleagues, Kickstarter-y people make mistakes? Like what kinds of stuff did you learn? I mean, I think one of the biggest lessons, and you've already said it there, is so sensible, is to start with a little project. I think that's genius. But yeah, I'm curious if there's anything else kind of mistakes-wise that you've learned or managed to avoid.
No, we could talk about the mistakes I made all day long. No matter how cautious you approach things, you can't avoid making mistakes, right? You can't avoid some level of failure. That's just part of success. If you're going to be incredibly successful at something, you're probably going to fail incredibly at some things somewhere along the way. And one of the big things were the second Kickstarter, which was going to be the first, the big one, but we did a little one and then learn our lessons and then went into the big one. I'm very ambitious when it comes to growing things, and I wanted it to be, this huge, humongous thing. And I was really excited about it, poured a lot of energy into it. And one of the mistakes I made, one among many, was relying on the biggest influencer. So sometimes you can think, oh, there's a golden bullet, right? Or a golden ticket. And if I could just get this person to promote my thing, if I can get Brandon Sanderson, for example, or another big author in your genre to promote my book with their audience, it's got to do this. And then you invest, the resources and the effort to making that happen, and it doesn't pan out as well as you expected. That can be that was a mistake I made. So the recommendation I would make, and this is actually conventional wisdom in most kind of similar spaces, is kind of search out a few smaller influencers that you want to help promote, or you want them to promote you instead of going after this, the unicorn or the golden cow or whatever it is. Don't expend so much effort going after one big thing. Go after several smaller influencers or colleagues and ask them to help, and generally that works out a lot better.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think following on from that, Judith Mortimer says, do Kickstarters for books work if you're not a known name? She said, I've supported some anthology Kickstarters, but they only really seem to succeed if they have a named writer involved with them. So that's sort of leading on from what you were just saying there. So yeah, do you have to be a name, or can you build as you go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to be a name? To be a known name or a known author. Does that mean you have 100,000 people or 10,000 or 1,000? I suppose the thing with Kickstarter is it will it'll, if you put effort in, it will put in the same amount of effort. So if you bring, I don't know, let's say 10,000 people, which seems like a lot, or even like 1,000, right? If you bring 1,000 people to your page, it's going to bring 1,000 people, right? Or it's not exact, but it's going to put in the same amount of effort that you put in terms of getting organic growth. So obviously, if you're a named author and you have a bigger following and that's going to help bring more people, then that's going to show Kickstarter, oh, I'm going to bring more people too because this person's bringing loads of people to the table. So there is an element of you do have to bring something. You can't just show up a Kickstarter with 0 and expect them to, put your project in front of people. You have to meet them halfway. And yeah, so whatever that is, you can expect it to sort of double almost.
Okay. And so before JP's got some questions for you, but before we dive into those, what are the differences between marketing a Kickstarter and marketing a book, I suppose, because you wear the indie author hat and a Kickstarter hat now. How the bloody hell do you find people to support your Kickstarter?
That is the question.
It is the question.
That is the question.
Yeah.
So what I have found, and there are many similarities between indie author and indie game designer, let's say. And I think there are lots of, cross skills that you can take from between many different categories, but building a mailing list is a huge one. For example, that's something you do, you're recommended to do as an indie author is build your newsletter, build your mailing list, get as many people on that as possible. That is a direct channel that you have to your people. And that is also an extremely powerful tool in using with Kickstarter. Now, Kickstarter has, the first Kickstarter can be especially difficult because what happens, you find after you've run one, is you had to bring a lot of the stuff, you have to bring a lot of the people and a lot of the resources. But with the second one, Kickstarter is going to reach out to all the people that backed your first one for you and let them know that you're running another one. And then when you've run a third one, it's going to reach out to the people from the first two and let them know. So you can sort of see just from me describing that it's going to quickly ramp up momentum and build your audience, even just within the Kickstarter, it's called ecosystem, even without your newsletter. But your newsletter is going to help, or your mailing list is going to also help immensely. I would say the third thing is, reaching out to other people, other influencers that are maybe just like a little bit ahead of you and asking them for help. You're sometimes, if you can even go up a little bit further, to people who, have a YouTube following or an Instagram following, and you may have to pay them a little bit to promote your stuff and sponsor them. That can help as well.
Yeah. And are they, I'm guessing they wash their face and they are profitable, and that the art of that is in the pricing of the tiers. Yeah. It could be very easy to sort of set tiers really low, and you're kind of afraid to ask people to pay for something. It's a typical creative thing, right? You're afraid to ask for money, you're afraid to ask for help. But you'll find that the audience on Amazon are there to buy a book, right? On KDP. But the audience for Kickstarter are there to be a part of something, and they want to see that something succeed. And they want to see, you're promising them you're going to create this thing, and they're like, okay, well, I'm here to support that because it isn't there yet. I want to be part of it. I want to be, how many people are out there who want to write a book but never will, and they'll take that to their deathbed. I wish I'd written a book and I didn't. So you're giving people a little bit of that experience of writing this book or being involved in writing a book. So you're sort of selling them a bit of a dream, and people are often willing to part with a bit more in terms of finance when it comes to building something like that. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Right. Some questions from JP. Actually, I may have slipped some other ones from JP but JP says, if your project involves physical goods, is there a specific company or person or people that you prefer over others, and why, sort of in terms of, I guess, delivery?
Ooh, great question.
Or creation and delivery, I suppose.
Yeah. So physical goods is a tricky one. That's a whole new game, right? Because as an indie author, you use print on demand for your physical stuff most of the time, and whether that be KDP or is it Lightning? Is Lightning Source still around, or is it?
Yeah, Lightning Source, Ingram Spark. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you use that kind of service, and then the thing with that is your margins are pretty slim because they front most of the costs, so you get a little bit of a royalty on those. So naturally then ebooks and digital content becomes more of an attractive proposition for you as an indie author because you're going to get more of a royalty from that. So you kind of don't do a lot of the physical side of the things. But when it comes to Kickstarter, you don't have to include physical products, but it helps because people love to hold something in their hand. You do have this, you're faced with these challenges in terms of fulfillment and shipping and production, and it can seem very daunting and overwhelming. And that's because it kind of is. There's no way to get around that. You do have to build relationships with people. You have to learn about print. If you don't, I mean, you can still use print on demand. You can plug these things into Ingram Spark in the end, and they'll still fulfill. But then your profit margins are going to be smaller. Whereas if you get like 1,000 backers, you'll find that if you go to your printer and ask them for 1,000 books, and generally 1,000 is the minimum you can get from a printer, you'll be surprised at how cheap it is to print those books versus just doing a handful. So yeah, there are a lot of companies out there. For example, in the gaming side, you have Easy Ship, GameQuest. They will help you ship things. We use a partner called Nord Games, who are a publisher, but also have a warehouse in California, and they help us fulfill all of our stuff. So we a lot of people in our space get their stuff printed in China, but because of a lot of the supply chain issues that we're seeing at the minute, and also because we don't want to wait months for our stuff to get to our people, our backers, we get our stuff printed in Canada. Now it costs a little bit more, but it also gets there much quicker, and they're very reliable. So we get our stuff printed in Canada, sent to California, and then Nord Games, who are amazing, send all of our stuff out to our people. And yeah, so it's a matter of building relationships with those people and asking around in your space, asking people who've done it before. Okay, so who have you used and how did you do this? And just, build a relationship with other creators and find out what they did and what worked for them and try and sort of emulate that.
Okay, I have no idea what the next question means, so I'm very interested to find the answer. But JP says your campaigns include the use of D&D 5e. That's the bit I don't know what that means. What hoops have you had to go through in order to legally use that system for your commercial products?
Okay, so Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So that's the...
okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking there's some kind of weird point system. What is it? Is it a monster? Yeah. A weird dragon? I don't know. 5th edition. That makes so much more sense now. Duh.
I'll have to get you to play a game of D&D sometime. That'd be fun. But yeah, so that's a good question. Dungeons and Dragons is owned by a company called Wizards of the Coast, who are in turn owned by Hasbro, the toy company. And Wizards of the Coast have this thing called the Open Gaming License. And the Open Gaming License is really good. It looks pretty intimidating when you look at it at first. But it's actually... It's kind of like legal speak, right? Any legal document can look it's like, oh, I don't know what that means, but it's only 2 pages long. And then it attached to that is something called the system reference document. And is it the standard? The SRD is the abbreviation, but it's kind of like, here are all the things you're allowed to use. And the OGL, which is only 2 pages long, is very clear if you sit down and read it. And it's a nice provision for third parties like me to come along and take the D&D game and make it our own and create our own content for that. So as long as we abide by the OGL, Open Gaming License, we're okay. If you sell things, there's a benefit to. It's kind of like KDP. If you sell things on KDP and you become exclusive, you're allowed to use Kindle Unlimited. So you get a nice little benefit there. You get more readers and a little bit of extra income from a different audience. Dungeons and Dragons do something similar. They have something called DM's Guild, which is their online store. And if you use them exclusively, you get extra perks in terms of, leeway with the OGL. You don't have to use the Open Gaming License. You can do it. There's a lot more freedom. You can use a lot more of their stuff. So you do have to be careful when licensing is involved. And in the future, we're going to be licensing other products and also licensing some of our own stuff. So there'll be a lot more of that in the future. But yeah, it's one of those things. It can be, you just need to make sure you're following the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, neither of us are lawyers. So we do advise you to get advice from a lawyer if you are ever unsure about anything, or if signing contracts or trying to get licenses. Please do check with the appropriate type of lawyer, not just your mortgage lawyer. Okay, well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Oh, how long have we got? I guess it isn't like a huge sort of wow kind of example, but I've listened to the podcast and sometimes I hear people, kind of recite their experiences and it's like, oh wow, that's so badass. I guess when I started out in the indie author space and started writing, you get a lot of, everyone gets this, you get naysayers, and sometimes that can be family and friends or whoever. And they're like, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're leaving your job you have a real job and you're going to this fake job. What's wrong with you?
Fake job.
Yeah, it's like,
I work harder now than ever.
Yeah, exactly. I know they say, find something you love and you'll never work another day in your life. But I like to say, you'll work more than you've ever worked in your life. Yeah.
Every fucking day of your life, yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I had a few people who were like, I kind of played my cards close to my chest when it came to starting out, because there's a bit of trepidation. You're like, do I want to tell people? But eventually you're going to tell family or friends, and I was expecting a bit more support from people and did not get that support. I think that's a very common thing. And the main culprit was my sister. So if I ever brought up writing a book or a novel or making a living at some point doing that to my sister, she would laugh at me. She would laugh her head off. And but I started using that as a tool. And that tool was, I hate people telling me what to do, right? But more than that, like, I hate people telling me what I can't do.
Yeah.
So if you tell me I can't do something, you better fucking believe I am going to do it. And my sister was telling me I can't do it, so I did it. So that's like a big.
Gotta love a bit of sibling rivalry. I have lots of half brothers and sisters and a stepsister. So I have 2 half brothers, a half sister, and a stepsister, and we are all ferociously competitive. So like our family app is just like constant like smack talk against each other and like who's the best, and I'm always like, well, motherfuckers, I'm the firstborn, and so I'm always gonna be number 1, baby.
I love it. I'm the firstborn too, so yeah.
Firstborn for the win. And that usually tends to shut them all up because there's literally nothing they can say.
Brilliant.
Amazing. Right. Okay. Well, tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your books, your Kickstarters, what's coming up. Yeah. Where can everybody find you? Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, well, one thing to add, I would like to, anyone listening to this who's been sitting on the fence about Kickstarter, or maybe this is the first time you've heard about it, I would recommend that you look into it. It might seem like, oh, I'm already doing all this KDP stuff and this, writing novels, and it's already a lot of work. But Kickstarter, I feel, is going to, let's put it this way, it's kind of where indie publishing was 10 years ago. So can you imagine if you started publishing books 10 years ago, where you would be today?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. So I'd recommend you look into it, learn a little bit, see what the fuss is. Maybe try a little mini itty bitty tiny Kickstarter to see how it goes, and I can almost guarantee that you'll learn it. Well, I'll guarantee you'll learn a huge amount, but you'll also kind of like get this little flame, this little fire, and catch the thing, and you'll just want to keep making more because it's so much fun and the community is so awesome on there. So I encourage people to give it a go. But if people want to find anything else about me, you can check my website, paddyfinn.com. I'm on Kickstarter, obviously, Paddy Finn as well. So if you just put Paddy Finn in, most places, you'll find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's patrons and all of the show's listeners. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You are listening to Paddy Finn, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I am joined by September C. Fawkes, and we have an amazing discussion on what voice is, how to create it, and how to give your characters that sparkling, memorable voice that we are all chasing after. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.